Here now is political analyst Professor Somadoda Fikeni joining us live from our Pretoria studios. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. Now, is there any other avenue that President Zuma could explore to stay onto power?
There is absolutely none beyond tomorrow, because it's either he resigns or he allows Parliament to push him out of the way. Those are the only options he has. In terms of the legal approach, there is almost no space for that, because this is not a contractual arrangement where you say, I'll run to the CCMA. Political deployment doesn't have that option.
Now, Prof, just take us through the thought process, or what went through your mind as after seeing that interview he had with our presidential correspondent Mzwayimbeje, where he stated that he asked the ANC president and the Secretary General as to what he had done wrong.
Actually, this was a vintage President Jacob Zuma that we've seen in the last 10 or so years, because there he always portrays himself as a victim. He takes no accountability, no responsibility. You saw the same during the ANC conference in Nasrec. It was the world, it was the ANC, it was the veterans, it was the alliance partners who had done something wrong, but not him. And that in itself, I think he is in his own universe of logic where he has come to believe. But again, the reason for this is because ANC leaders always defended him even when he was wrong. He might now be confused as to what is happening when there is no recent scandal or recent mistake. They want him to leave, even though the reasons are quite obvious. He takes absolutely no responsibility, and he is a victim. And more serious is the fact that in many ways he was trying to imply or trying to incite some kind of insurrection from within the ranks of the ANC.
Prof, why do you think President Jacob Zuma, you mentioned and touched on the fact that he has always been defended by the leadership of the ANC, and today, present day today, things have changed and he has been recalled. That interview that he did earlier on today, and stating, as you say, he playing the victim, which is something that, as you mentioned, he is known to do. Why do you think he's holding on to power and defying the ANC leadership? Why is he holding on to power and not letting go and stepping aside?
I do think that the first reason is his worries about the legal challenges he's going to face, and the fact that the new leader might actually let him more vulnerable and he may not even have influence over some of the law enforcement agencies once he's out of power. The second one, I think he has created some kind of a delusion that he is bigger than the party and that he is a lot more wiser about the liberation struggle than any other collective of the ANC. Because very often he used to say even veterans are confused about the struggle. He's the one sole remaining member who knows what is right about the struggle and the ANC policies. And in the statement itself, I do think that there were many contradictions there. And one of the other reasons is what I stated earlier, that ANC in the last few years was built around the personality cult of President Zuma. It was refurbished around him. It was not expecting the leader to align himself to the principles of the ANC, but it was the ANC adjusting itself to President Zuma to a point where he no longer make a distinction between the institution or the organization called the ANC and the person called President Zuma.
Now, Prof, earlier on, the President mentioned a few times that the people, or ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa and the Secretary General Ace Magashule, when going through to him and having that discussion or having that meeting, when he asked what wrong he had done, does that not create an impression of the ANC President and the SG of not really being strong in their conviction or not being able to communicate to him? Or is this just a ploy, as you mentioned earlier, the fact that the victim game always comes into play when it comes to President Zuma? He's painted a picture of the two leaders being sort of incompetent.
Well, remember that everyone else is usually at fault with President Zuma except himself. How many times within the NEC have ANC leaders tried to raise the motion of no confidence, debated issues and presented to say reason A, B, C, D, E are the reasons? How many times have we seen judgments going against President Zuma? Is it not common sense that if you want to prepare for elections come 2019, you wouldn't want a leader who is compromised by answering to the court cases to be the face of the organization? So that in itself, I don't think it is a strong reason enough. Simply for him, he has gotten used to getting his way whenever there is an argument. Veterans came, tried to convince him. He browbeaten that, he actually dismissed them. He has somewhat become disdainful of ANC leaders. He is the ultimate reference point whenever he reflects. So to me, I think it's not whether they were forceful enough or not. It's simply he has his own universe of logic, which is not relating to the reality outside.
Immediately after the interview with the SABC earlier today, ANC President and Deputy President of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa, went through to the presidential house, to the State House in Pretoria, to meet with President Jacob Zuma. Do you have any idea what was tabled at that discussion? Has there been any indication or any communique from since that meeting had taken place earlier today?
There's been nothing communicated. One would understand the sensitivity of those political discussions, but one can only imagine that the last-minute desperate efforts to prevent the president being humiliated by being removed through a motion of no confidence in parliament was the main thing, especially when ANC had to humble itself and ride on the EFF motion of no confidence. But also remember, President Zuma here will make a record in many ways. He was fired by President Mbeki in that same parliament in 2005. He may be fired by parliamentarians in 2018. No one that I can remember has been fired twice in the same parliament.
Prof, unfortunately, we have run out of time. This is a developing story that the whole world is watching, as we all know, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure tomorrow there will be more news unless President Zuma decides to resign this evening, and we'll definitely get a hold of you. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for now. And that was Professor Somadoda Fikeni giving us an insight into the unfolding political agenda in the country. He joined us from our Pretoria studio.